Hey everybody, David here with BeckerArt. Hey, I want to talk to you today about breaking the rules and when it comes to your artwork and breaking some rules that you were taught in school that I was taught myself. One of them being like, don't use white in your watercolors. Basically, mix your blacks. And so these are rules that you were taught in art school when you were learning how to do the fundamentals. But once you get past those fundamentals in art school, it's almost ideal to start breaking them because then you're going to be working on a new style, a style that's all your own. And so I'm going to go through a couple of these rule breaking elements that I want to talk to you about that I had in school, and now I'm kind of breaking those rules because I'm past the fundamentals. And what does that mean when you're past your fundamentals? You basically, when you're painting, you're not thinking about things like those fundamentals. When you're painting like a wash, you don't think how you're doing it, you just do it. You pick a color and you go with that color, and you know what colors to mix to get other colors, and that's going beyond the fundamentals. And then in composition, a lot of times too, what we do is we have a certain composition rules that we follow, but then you're always painting the same kind of picture. And so to get a new style, to create something beyond what the basic tradition is you want to break those rules. Go into breaking the rules so that your composition, your style will become a little bit different from the last person that taught you or from the teachers. And I have done that through the past with my teachers because I was always told never to use white, never use just black, but mix your blacks. I was talked about composition, how always watch out for your tangents and watch out for the weight on the sides. So these are all things that are taught to you as fundamentals. But when you get past that and become a professional, what you want to do is kind of break those rules, and that way maybe something that makes your style your own, and so then you become your own artist. So let me just go over a couple of these rules, not rules, but a couple of things that we're going to be breaking. So one of them is basically colors. So when we talk about colors, a lot of times, when you're painting a picture off of a photograph and you're going to use the colors of the actual object. Well, there are some artists who will take it, and I'm just thinking right now about one of those artists, Carol Carter from St. Louis, who rarely paints the colors of the actual objects, the initial color of the object. So an apple, if she paints an apple, it's not going to always be red or a golden delicious. It won't be yellow. It'll be like green. That's just so different, or a rainbow color of an apple. So it's like you don't traditionally have to always use the color that the actual object is. And it all depends on what kind of style you have. Are you really colorful? Do you just do things black and white? So colors is one of the things that you can break the rules and not have to actually paint the color of the actual objects. The second thing would be, and that comes to colors, it comes to white. So using white. As a watercolorist, boy, that was one of the biggest things in my school. Irving Shapiro told me never use white. That was like a no-no. And there's actually the traditional way of doing transparent watercolor where you do not use white. But with competitions like the TWSA, they want their Transparent Watercolor Society. They in their rules do not want white. But many of the other societies now, you can use white with your watercolor. And actually, a lot of these rules I followed until I would go to like museums, and I was going to a museum at the American Academy of Art, actually the Artists of Chicago, and I saw a Sargent show, and in that show there was all these beautiful paintings, watercolors that Sargent did that had white in them. I'm like, oh wait a second, if he can use white, why can I not? But that's, again, he was beyond traditional doing the fundamentals of painting. He just used it because it looks good at the end. And so that's about a lot of these things. When you're doing your breaking the rules of the things that you learned in school, the outcome is what is important. How you got there, what you used, what colors you used, doesn't matter. It's all basically what happens with your painting at the very end. So using white, go ahead and use white. Use white to enhance your painting, not to cover up mistakes. And I think that's the reason a lot of times in schools we teach you to not use white, because most of the time you would just use that for anything that is white when you should be using the white of the paper instead. But there are times when I like to using white to get a thicker amount of pigment when you're using that in a wet wash. Or when I'm enhancing like the clouds and I want a soft edge, then I just go ahead and use white. But again, that's past fundamentals. Number two or number three would be mixing. Don't mixing blacks. I was always told in school, mix your blacks because you have a colorful black. Well, I found through teaching many years that it's easier for me to tell my students, instead of mixing the black, which you can do with like an alizarin and a dark blue or a dark green, you can do that and mix it pretty well and pretty colorful. But I find it's easier, and I always like to make things easier for my students, is to just use a black, like an ivory black, a peach black, there's so many different kind of blacks. Just buy the black, and then when you go to mix it, mix a color into it. I had made one of the most wonderful black skies at one time, a night sky with Prussian blue and peach black, and man, that thing just shone. It was just so rich, and I didn't mix the black to make it colorful blue, like the blue just mixed it with the black, and it came out really awesome. It's a lot easier for students to understand that too. In the end, if you want to get a colorful black, I just mix color into my black. Very simple. Next one would be rubbing out. You're always told never to rub out your watercolor. Everything's fresh. Go in there and freshly put in, your paint and leave it alone. Don't touch it. Don't rub it. Don't blend it. Which, you still can do that really well, and not to blend it to make it soft edged. What you want to do is just put on a nice wash and work wet into wet. But there are times when rubbing out is a really cool thing and a good thing to do, where you're doing a painting and then you rub out some little light hints and stuff. So rubbing out is not a bad thing. I know a lot of times we've been told, don't rub out, don't overwork your painting. And there's another thing with overworking your painting. You can go over as many times as long as the way you do it is very fresh, and you go in there and put it down, your water, and then float your pigment into the water. And I don't care how many washes you do with that, it will become fresh and look fresh if you do it in that fashion and learn the fundamentals of watercolor and how to put it on fresh. Because you can do 4, 5, 6 layers, and as long as you're doing them correctly and letting the pigment float on top of each other and not scrubbing it out, or scrubbing it out and then letting a layer of paint go on top of that. But rubbing out is not a bad thing. You can sometimes get back to the light of the paper with a soft edge. So there's many artists I know that do that nowadays. And let's see, the next one is composition rules. All the rules of composition, no tangents, no things in the corner. The weight on a pendulum should always be even. And so all those composition rules, that's one of those hard things to do when to break, because you have to know what the composition rule is to begin with. So if you know what the composition rule is to begin with, and then you have to figure out a way of breaking the rules so that the composition still works, but in your favor, that you want to have good composition. So that happens a lot. Well, like when you're putting something way in the front or on the edge of the paper, and maybe there's a color that's too enhanced in the background, but you can use the other composition rules to break those rules and still make it work. And that's the part that really shows a professional to somebody that's just learning fundamentals of composition, because you can really break those rules, and then you can make some really cool looking paintings because you broke the rules, and it becomes your style. Maybe a certain kind of way of you doing things, and you're the only one that does that. And so I keep on talking about these breaking rules, but it's basically so that you, sooner or later, when you get past the fundamentals, you will have your own style, and some of those things will have some of these in them, like where you don't use the composition rules to the way they traditionally are. All right, and so then the last two things is a traditional painting style. We tend to, when we're students, we tend to always go to traditional painting, and you do it traditionally. You do transparent watercolor, you do it on paper, you do it on a certain kind of paper, and you make it look a certain way, like the traditional artists have done it, the masters have done it, and so you keep on going with that way, and you don't break from that. Well, they already did it, so you're not going to get famous for those, because those have already been done in a traditional way. Now, you can learn fundamentals through that. That's a great thing to do, and take and work your paintings and paint masters' works and see how they did it, but then break away from that and break those rules for traditional painting and make something new. Use a different material. And that's actually the last thing I want to talk about is materials, traditional materials. We, back in the day, they only had those certain type of things to paint with, and nowadays we have so much different kind of paper, paints. Oh my gosh, it just goes, and how they even show your paintings. I mean, there's so many different traditional ways of doing things, but go ahead and break the rules and make something different. Do your watercolor with gouache and maybe even with acrylic on top of that. It's going to be called, mixed media, but I don't even, if you use, I can use acrylic and make it look just like a watercolor. So it doesn't really matter, again, what it's called. It's what the outcome is of your painting. Really, the only thing that's important is you starting your painting and finishing your painting, and then people who look at it just see the picture as the painting as one. They don't look about what you did with the composition. They don't look. They just the outcome, the final finished product of your painting is what's important. And if it looks like it's traditionally done, that's fine. But if it doesn't, it probably looks different, but it's still beautiful. Nobody's going to care how you got there. It's just going to be, your style, your look, and that's your style, and that's what's going to sell you. So go ahead and learn the fundamentals. Definitely learn the fundamentals, because like drawing, composition, using those traditional ways of painting at first, but then once you get that kind of figured out and you're not thinking about it anymore when you're painting, that's when you start breaking the rules. And I find myself doing that right now, is that I kind of break the rules and try to work on different kind of materials. I try to work with different subject matter, and I'm just trying different things. And that could be a bad thing too if you just never stick to one thing, because then I think galleries, or you're not being known for doing a certain kind of style. And basically artists out there who are masters, they have a certain style that as soon as you see their work, it's exactly theirs. So, and that just takes a lot of painting. Basically, to get there, you do a lot of practice, a lot of painting, and break those rules. Because in the end, you become and get your own style, your own kind of look, and that's what I guess all of us really want in the end, is break those rules and get your style. All right, so that's this week's newsletter, and about breaking the rules, breaking the rules of basically watercolor. But that does, breaking the rules of watercolor means sometimes putting acrylic into that, even putting gouache in there, mixing them together. And I'm teaching a lot of classes right now how to break those rules, basically. So I'm taking watercolor and gouache and putting them together, which so that big rule of using the white is just thrown out the window, because it's basically I'm using opaque colors on top of my watercolors, but I'm doing it in a way sometimes where the gouache is just as transparent as the other stuff because of the way I use it. So we'll see how that goes, and you'll probably see a lot of my work that is going to be a little bit differently in the near future, but I'm also teaching that to you guys. And so that's the reason I brought this up, because in class last week at Canuga, I was teaching about that, and some people actually, it helped them out to realize that sometimes it stifles some of the artists and thinking that they cannot use white ever, and so they're really, or they can't trace, and it's like you can't trace in the beginning, when more than half of the people who are out there, even professionals, take projectors and trace their work to get their final results. So don't worry about rules so much as just do and paint. Don't worry about the rules. There's no police that are going to come and arrest you because you used white or you didn't mix your blacks, all right? So you just get out there and rub out and do your composition rules, break all those rules, and it'll be all good, because all we're going to look at is your final piece. All right? So until Thursday, where we do a paint along, and this week we're going to be doing a cardinal painting, a picture of a bird, a cardinal, and we're going to see if we can make some rules while we're doing it, all right? So we'll see you Thursday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.